The themes and the ultimate conclusion of High Plains Drifter drew a lot of interest, but this movie was not, say, a sequel or a sequel to Pale Rider, but the same kind of themes about retribution from a person who's coming into town to save the town from itself. Now, Pale Rider is a 1985 American Western film directed and produced by Clint Eastwood, who also stars in the lead role as Preacher. The title is a reference to the four horsemen of the apocalypse, as the pale horse's Ghost Rider Eastwood represents death. The film, which took over $41 million at the box office, became the highest-grossing Western of the 1980s. A stellar cast with Michael Moriarty, Oscar nominee Kerry Snodgrass, Christopher Penn, Richard Dysart, Sidney Penny before her Santa Barbara years, Richard Kyle, Doug McGrath, and John Russell. Now filmed in Canada, produced by the Malposa Company, only a $7 million budget, but made again 41.4. Now in the Old West, outside La Hood, California, in Carbon Canyon, mining Barry and Coy La Hood is waging a war of intimidation against independent prospectors and their families, including Hull Bart, who is courting Sarah Wheeler. Sarah's teenage daughter, Megan, prays for deliverance from La Hood after gangrenous men attack the mining camp and kill her dog. Shortly afterward, a man atop a pale horse rides into Carbon Canyon. When Hull heads to town to pick up supplies, four of La Hood's men beat him with axe handles before the stranger fights them off with his own axe handle. Hull then invites his rescuer to dinner, and while the stranger is washing, notices what appears to be 6 bullet wounds in his back. When the stranger arrives at the dining table, he is wearing a clerical collar and is thereafter referred to as Preacher. Coy La Hood's son Joshua attempts to scare off the Preacher with a gigantic workman named Club. Preacher, however, disables Club with a sledgehammer blow to the groin. A very painful scene. Now, Coy returns from Sacramento, learns of the Preacher's arrival, and unsuccessfully attempts to bribe and then threaten him. At Preacher's suggestion, La Hood then offers the miners $10,000 per claim, provided they evacuate within 24 hours. La Hood says he plans to hire the services of a corrupt marshal named Stockburn to clear them out if they refuse. The miners ultimately reject La Hood's offer, despite Preacher warning them about Stockburn. Megan expresses her love for Preacher, but he gently rebuffs her, saying she's too young. Megan angrily assumes Preacher is really in love with Sarah. La Hood's men dam the creek, forcing the miners to mine a dry bed. Megan rides into La Hood's camp, where Joshua shows her the blasting operation before he attempts to rape her. Preacher arrives on horseback again, disarms Joshua, and shoots him through the hand. Now, Stockburn and his deputies arrive in La Hood. Coy gives him a rough description of the Preacher, which startles Stockburn because the man Coy is describing is dead. Spider Conway, one of the miners and Coy's former partner, discovers a large gold nugget in a dry creek bed and rides into town with his teenage sons, where he yells drunken abuse at La Hood from the street. Stockburn and his deputies gun him down, and Stockburn sends a message that he wants Preacher to meet him in town the next morning. Sarah begs Preacher not to go and tells him she will marry Hull, despite their feelings for Preacher. Now, the following day, Preacher and Hull blow up La Hood's mining site with dynamite. Now, this is where it gets really good. To stop Hull from following him, Preacher scares off Hull's horse and rides into town alone. In a gunfight that follows, he kills all but 2 of La Hood's men who run away, and then one by one, all of Stockburn's deputies. And finally, Preacher kills Stockburn, who says, "You!" who recognized him in disbelief before he shot in the head. La Hood, watching from his office, aims a rifle at the Preacher, but is shot dead by Hull. Now, Preacher nods at Hull and rides off towards the snow-capped mountains. Megan arrives, seeing Preacher riding away, shouts her love and thanks to him. "We love you, Preacher. Bye." Very interesting scene, but Sidney Penny makes it work. Now, Pale Rider was primarily filmed in the Border Mountains and the Sawtooth National Recreation Area in Central Idaho, just north of Sun Valley in late '84. The opening credits featured the jagged Sawtooth Mountains south of Stanley. Train station scenes were filmed in Tuolumne County, California, near Jamestown. Scenes of a more established gold rush town, in which Eastwood character picks up the pistol at a Wells Fargo office, was filmed in the real gold rush town of Columbia, also in Tuolumne County. See, why Pale Rider works at a lot of levels? Because you believe the cast. Now, and also because of religious themes. In an auto interview, Eastwood said that the character Preacher is an out-and-out ghost. However, whereas Eastwood's 73 Western High Plains Drifter resolves the storyline by means of a series of unfolding flashback narratives, although ambiguity still remains, Pale Rider does not include any such obvious clues to the nature and past and Preacher, other than the 6 bullet wound scars in his back and his relationship with Stockbird, who claims he once knew a man like Preacher. Viewers are left to draw their own conclusions regarding the overall storyline and its meaning. Now, the movie's title is taken from the book of Revelation, chapter 6, verse 8, and I looked and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. The reading of the biblical passage describing the character is neatly choreographed to correspond with the sudden appearance of the preacher, who arrived as a result of prayer from Megan, in which he quoted Psalm 23. Preacher's comment after beating one of the villains is, well, the Lord certainly does work in mysterious ways. After Coy offers to let him establish a lucrative ministry in his town, the preacher replies, you can't serve God and mammon both, mammon being money. According to Robert Jewett, the film's dialogue parallels Paul the Apostle's teaching on divine retribution. Now, Pale Rider was released in the States in June 1985, and again, it was the first mainstream Hollywood Western to be produced after the massive financial failure of Heaven's Gate, and that was a big failure, ladies and gentlemen. Now, on Rotten Tomatoes, the film has an approval rating of 93% based on reviews from 29 critics. The site's consensus states, nearly a decade after he outlawed Josie Wales, Eastwood returns as a director to the genre that made his name with his elegant spiritual western that riffs on the classic Shane. On Metacritic, the film has a score of 61% based on reviews from 13 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Now, Roger Ebert praised the film, giving it a 4 out of 4 stars. Further, he stated, Pale Rider is overall a considerable achievement, a classic Western of style and excitement. Now, the film was entered in the 85 Cannes Film Festival and including the Western nominations for the American Film Institute's 10 Top 10 lists. Now, ironically, the music used in the film's trailer was a stock piece by British composer Alan Hawkshaw, known to British viewers for his use as a title theme for Channel 4 News. Unusually, Channel 4 News did not secure permanent exclusivity rights to Hawkshaw's theme, titled Best Endeavors, resulting in it also being used for the trailer for Pale Rider. Now, ironically, one reviewer in the Washington Post didn't like the movie, finding that pretty soon we would recollect why Westerns lost their appeal. The movie is really pretty, full of little gold aspens and snow-capped mountains, but it's slow, dark, and badly timed. But the Chicago Tribune commented that though Westerns were out of fashion, fresh and challenging Westerns with Clint Eastwood always will be in vogue. Now, when it was a typical drive-in movie at the time, Pale Rider was drawing a lot of interest because most drive-ins in Canada we saw Pale Rider at had the dimensions at the theater to show such a wide vista. But the combination of Canadian actors and established actors, including Snodgrass, that was their big comeback movie. And Michael Moriarty, of Holocaust fame, he's always gives his best performance. But to see a young Christopher Penn, very underrated actor, later starred in Footloose and different movies involving his brother and other key actors, including, Reservoir Dogs. But I think why it works because the fans of High Plains Drifter know what they're getting with Pale Rider. But this is more directly, is the Pale Rider the angel of death or the angel of retribution? He's not a living person, because any man at the time where a woman like Sidney Penny would offer herself to a person, wait a couple of years and, that was the old West. A young girl, 15, 16 years old, would marry an older man who would have children together. It wasn't unheard of. But her to reject Sidney Penny because he loved her as a human being, not in a sexual way. But Clint Eastwood, never known Clint Eastwood to be a spiritual person, but because he grew up acting in the good, the bad, the ugly Westerns, he saw the balance between good, bad, and ugly. And let me tell you something. The scene of the shootout with Clint Eastwood and all those, these alleged killers is just tremendous. I give this 4 stars out of 4. It still resonates for me. So, ladies and gentlemen, you like what we're doing? We're a Clint Eastwood podcast. Let us know when to like, comment, subscribe, or share. Bye.